Tonight, we will delve into the final days of Queen Elizabeth I, the last monarch of the Tudor era and a prominent ruler in English history. She guided England through a period of thriving art, notable victories, and the establishment of an empire. Despite her outward display of power and authority, there was a mysterious air surrounding her death. Before settling in, take a moment to show support by liking the video and subscribing if you genuinely enjoy my content. Feel free to share where you are watching from and the local time in the comments, as it's always intriguing to see our global audience. Now, adjust the lighting. Perhaps switch on a fan for a subtle background noise, and let's embark on this journey together. As Elizabeth I neared her 70th year in the winter of 1602, a remarkable feat during the Tudor era, signs of her aging became more apparent. Her once flawless complexion, masked by makeup, now revealed the vulnerability of her advancing age. The elaborate wigs that symbolized her authority now adorned a body that bore the weight of almost 5 decades of rule. Reigning unchallenged for 44 years, she had surpassed her rivals, outlived potential suitors, and quelled any threats against her. However, cracks were beginning to show in the strong facade she had maintained. Despite her sharp intellect, those in her inner circle observed subtle changes in her behavior. Her appetite diminished, her court appearances became irregular, and the once radiant aura surrounding her throne at Whitehall seemed to fade. Whispers of her declining health began circulating within the adorned halls of Richmond Palace with the turn of the year. Speculations arose that the once indomitable monarch was losing her vigor. Amid personal losses and the execution of Robert Devo, the Earl, betrayed by Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, in 1601, Queen Elizabeth I suffered a profound emotional blow. Despite his failed rebellion and power grab, Elizabeth harbored a unique affection for him, described by some as maternal love, and by others as something more profound. It pained her to watch him walk to his execution, and she never truly recovered from the grief it caused her. During her final days, she refused sleep and sustenance, preferring to stand motionless for long hours and rarely engaging in conversation. Her voice became weak and distant, and she often stared into the fireplace for hours on end, seemingly lost in her thoughts. The court tried to assist her through medical treatments and advice on her succession, but Elizabeth declined their help, burdened by a sorrow deeper than politics or her crown. As March approached, it became evident to those around her that the reign of Elizabeth I was drawing to a quiet and painful conclusion. Her private chamber at Richmond Palace grew even more somber, contrasting sharply with the once lively and vibrant court known for its music and intellectual discussions. Elizabeth withdrew from public life, refraining from council meetings and strolls in the gardens, and gradually dismissed her ladies-in-waiting until she was mostly alone with her thoughts. Even those permitted to be with her noticed a significant change in her demeanor. During her stay, Lady Scrow communicated in soft, uncertain tones, leaving observers unsure if her presence brought comfort or agitation. Whispers circulated that her mental faculties were deteriorating. It was at this moment that her doctors noticed a concerning development. Queen Elizabeth refused food and had begun resisting sleep entirely. She would stand motionless for hours near her bed or window, seemingly fearing that lying down would bring death closer. When her legs failed her, she sat rigidly on cushions, silently mouthing prayers or thoughts while staring at an unseen point. Speculation arose that she dreaded death not as a woman, but as a ruler. Elizabeth I had personified England for decades. Death meant relinquishing control over her people, image, and power. Perhaps that was her true fear, losing control. Physically, her health subtly but noticeably declined. A persistent cough emerged, her complexion paled, and she appeared to shrink beneath her lavish gowns. Her significant weight loss was concerning, yet she resisted close examination, maintaining her vanity even in illness. Amidst all this, a question lingered in courtiers' minds, rarely spoken aloud. Was this decline merely old age catching up, or did a hidden ailment lurk beneath the surface? The answer remained a mystery, locked behind her silent lips. Lips that once wielded power over empires now moved scarcely at all. To comprehend the burden Elizabeth I carried in her final weeks, one must delve into not just her physical state, but also her emotions, focusing on the shadow that loomed within her heart. Robert Dio, also known as the Earl of Essex, haunted the Queen, Elizabeth I, with their tumultuous relationship. The Earl displayed characteristics of being daring, ambitious, and spontaneous. He alternated between charming the Queen, disobeying her, asking for forgiveness, and then betraying her once more. Elizabeth I perceived enormous potential and risk in him. Despite his vanity, she favored him, granting him significant power in her court. However, his aspirations eventually veered towards danger. In 1601, he initiated a reckless and doomed rebellion to take control, ultimately leading to his execution. This event deeply affected the Queen, causing a profound change in her demeanor. She seemed to carry a burden of guilt, as depicted by rumors claiming she kept a locket with his picture and whispered his name in the night. Whether these reports were true or exaggerated by the courtiers, Elizabeth I's transformation was evident. Her previously unshakable facade crumbled, revealing a vulnerable and sorrowful side. The mourning process during that period was often misconstrued as spiritual rather than emotional distress. Nonetheless, those surrounding her noticed the shift in her behavior, marked by a lack of enthusiasm, withdrawal from activities, and a disinterest in music, which had once brought her immense joy. Engaged in singing, playing musical instruments, and enjoying the company of composers and poets, the Queen now requested quiet. It appeared that her heart had shattered long before. Her physical health deteriorated as the year 6003 marched forward. Elizabeth I's decline was becoming increasingly apparent, transitioning from private sorrow and seclusion to a public spectacle. Her gradual and tragic deterioration was witnessed by nobles, courtiers, and servants alike. Once a powerful ruler who had outsmarted monarchs and silenced opponents, she now appeared adrift within her own palace. Refusing to discuss her condition, she communicated through gestures or brief nods, seldom uttering a complete sentence. When pressed for advice on state matters, succession, or her well-being, she withdrew, as if words had become burdensome. Physicians debated her symptoms, attributing them to imbalances in humors or a mental disorder. Despite the disagreement on the cause, they struggled to find a cure. Symbolic of her mental state, she adamantly avoided lying down, remaining upright for extended periods, seemingly as if sleep signaled surrender to death. Witnesses later recounted how the Queen stood motionless in a corner, draped in black attire, a silent figure of contemplation or grief, leaving those around her uncertain of her thoughts or feelings. A hush seemed to envelop the surroundings as courtiers lowered their voices to whispers. Outside her door, nobles anxiously paced, awaiting updates. Unspoken fear thickened the air. not only of losing their queen, but also of the uncertainty that would follow. With no clear heir to the throne, and Elizabeth's reluctance to designate one, many believed James VI of Scotland would be chosen. However, without her endorsement, would her wishes be respected? England had a history of power struggles, and a queen's silence could lead to chaos. The collective silence wasn't just Elizabeth's. It was England collectively holding its breath. Amid various rumors surrounding Elizabeth I's passing, one theory stands out for its slow, gradual impact. Rather than a weapon like a sword or poison, her makeup may have been inadvertently harmful. For years, she had applied a white cosmetic layer, Venetian Suze, containing vinegar and white lead. Lead, a now known toxic substance, was absorbed through her skin from the daily application. This lead-based makeup, over time, could harm the nervous system, weaken muscles, cloud the mind, and ultimately shorten lifespan. Symptoms of lead poisoning remarkably mirrored Elizabeth's final months: fatigue, depression, tremors, loss of appetite, cognitive decline, and skin issues. Observers noticed her teeth had decayed, hair had thinned, and the once radiant skin had deteriorated. Despite the Queen concealing her flaws with elaborate makeup and disguising her true age, the marks and imperfections on her face were evident. She prioritized projecting eternal youth, even as her body showed signs of aging. The heavy makeup wasn't simply for vanity. It acted as a form of protection, although it may have had negative consequences due to potential lead exposure. The use of Venetian ceruse, a popular cosmetic at the time, could have exacerbated her decline. Elizabeth I's iconic image might have contributed to her downfall. As her health deteriorated, her courtiers grew concerned but tried to maintain composure. The Queen's refusal to eat and her deteriorating physical appearance raised alarm, although the understanding of illness back then was limited to the imbalance of bodily humors. Medical treatments involved bloodletting, herbal remedies, or purging, but unfortunately could not provide a clear diagnosis for the Queen's condition. Due to the lack of understanding regarding the Queen's condition, experts nowadays propose that she possibly fell victim to pneumonia while in Richmond Palace. The combination of chilly air, prolonged standing, and fasting might have triggered a lung infection. Symptoms like a persistent cough, chills, and a gradual descent into delirium support this hypothesis. In the absence of antibiotics, even a mild pneumonia case could prove deadly. Some theories suggest blood poisoning, potentially stemming from infected teeth or sores beneath her makeup. Elizabeth's dental care was subpar, having already lost multiple teeth. Untreated oral infections could lead to blood poisoning, a fatal condition now known as septicemia. However, none of these theories could be verified during her time. Consequently, her doctors speculated and employed herbal remedies, attempted warm compresses, and sought divine intervention. Despite their efforts, Elizabeth refused all medical interventions, declining incisions, bloodletting, and even full undressing to maintain her modesty until the very end. Throughout her illness, she remained mostly silent, with the quietness surrounding her becoming part of her affliction. Her household acted cautiously, her attendants wept discreetly, and her advisors observed helplessly as the once dominant figure in their lives gradually faded away. Rather than a sudden demise, she diminished like a candle flickering out in its holder. Her decline couldn't be halted, and the uncertainty of her condition left many waiting for either her passing or a miraculous recovery. Elizabeth I not only battled illness, but also carried the immense weight of her reign. For more than 40 years, she symbolized England itself, with her crown representing not just authority, but a living presence nurtured by her leadership. Through her actions, speeches, and cunning stratagems, she had earned her crown. Yet now, in the quiet of her quarters, the weight of that crown was tangible and unclaimed. The looming question of what was to come next shadowed the Queen as she neared the end of her life. With no offspring or direct heir, the esteemed Tudor lineage would perish with her, despite her steadfast rule and reluctance to designate a successor. Possibly, her hesitation stemmed from her aversion to acknowledging her mortality. The logical option for heir appeared to be James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, executed by Elizabeth years before. His legitimacy, Protestant faith, and connection to the Tudor lineage made him a strong contender. Yet obstacles persisted due to existing factions, unresolved enmities, and lurking Catholic claimants. As the Queen's health declined, urging for a formal declaration intensified, notably from figures like Robert Cecil, the Secretary of State, emphasizing the imperative of securing England's stability to avert civil unrest. The uncertainty of succession in a realm where monarchs ruled by divine right was a recipe for turmoil. Despite gentle pressure, the Queen remained reticent. Speculations arose about her preference for James as her successor, although her final decision was never verbalized. Some believe she indicated agreement when questioned about James, while others assert she murmured, "The first will have no rascal to succeed me," before eventually acquiescing to the inevitable. The Queen, renowned for her eloquence, left her succession undecided. It is plausible that acknowledging a successor remained a challenging notion in her thoughts. Admitting defeat was like acknowledging that her narrative, her lineage, and her epoch were truly reaching their end. This acknowledgment was possibly more agonizing than death itself. As March progressed and the temperatures dropped, those in attendance of Elizabeth I experienced an odd and increasingly unsettling reality. The Queen chose not to sleep, not sporadically, but not at all. Days and nights melded into an endless watch as she remained seated or standing in her chamber, with distant eyes and a detached spirit. Many perceived the Queen's fear not to be of death itself, but of the passage towards it. Rest. There were instances when her attendants implored her to rest, yet she resisted vehemently, causing them to cease their requests. Her refusal was not solely due to stubbornness. It was laden with superstition and grief. In earlier times, sleep was often viewed as a temporary form of death, a phase when the soul ventured perilously close to the afterlife. Despite her sharp logic and intellect, Elizabeth I may have harbored the belief that closing her eyes might mean they would never reopen. Therefore, she sat, sometimes slouched in her chair, at other times leaning against the wall, defying the constraints of her failing physique. The swelling in her legs worsened, her breath grew shallow, yet she remained resolute about not lying down. Her attendants attempted to soothe her with music, which she declined, and offered warm beverages, which she turned away. She neither sought nor accepted solace. It seemed as though she was vigilantly overseeing her own demise, refusing to extend it an invitation. Eventually, her strength began to falter. She collapsed multiple times, once being discovered crumpled beside her chair, refraining from calling out for aid. Subsequently, her ladies-in-waiting. In a solemn ritual, her attendants took shifts, lingering quietly by her side. reminiscent of the days when she held authority over the court. Only addressing her if she initiated conversation, a reverent and somber ambiance enveloped the room. Finally, conceding to rest, it was not out of tranquility, but sheer weariness that she yielded, and was carefully nestled under the soft covers as if she were a delicate artifact, being reverently placed in silk. Her brief repose marked an ominous turning point for many, symbolizing the inevitable end. As Queen Elizabeth I acquiesced to being laid in bed, a profound hush descended upon her chamber, with those nearest to her, including advisors, attendants, and physicians, recognizing the significance of not just a woman's passing, but the conclusion of an era. The Tudor dynasty, which had governed England for more than 100 years, was drawing to a close with her final breath. The room was dimly lit, footsteps muffled by tapestries, and candles flickering as the palace outside held its collective breath. There were no formal announcements, no tolling bells, only quiet murmurs echoing through the corridors of Richmond Palace. Longtime servants stood in anticipation, frozen in time, yearning for a word, a gesture, a farewell that would remain unspoken, despite the weightiness of the moment. Queen Elizabeth I remained silent, the once eloquent monarch who could sway armies, command silence in Parliament, and enchant foreign dignitaries. As she teetered between awareness and slumber, she uttered no parting words to her attendants, advisors, or to the kingdom she safeguarded for so long. Instead, her thoughts were conveyed through subtle movements, gentle nods, fleeting gazes, and the faintest tremors of her hands. Some speculated. Witnesses observed her extending her hand towards the crown, placed nearby. Some argued she was indicating a portrait of James VI, the presumed heir. However, there were no official announcements or final speeches that would be remembered in history. What thoughts occupied her in that moment of silence? Perhaps memories of her reign crossed her mind, from being a captive of her sister, Mary, to becoming the triumphant queen who rallied her troops at Tilbury, from presiding over a dazzling court of intellectuals and adventurers to facing the turmoil of religious conflicts. The imagery of executing Mary, Queen of Scots, the fall of the Earl of Essex, a life of authority intertwined with loneliness. Beyond her chamber, the preparations for what was to come were already in motion. Courtiers discreetly packed their possessions, diplomats drafted encrypted messages to their monarchs, and messengers awaited with horses ready for dispatch. Everyone was aware of the impending succession. Yet England lingered without a ruler until the very end. Elizabeth I retained her title of queen until her final breath, unchallenged and irreplaceable. As the last moments of her life transpired, her chamber attendees remained motionless, their expressions reflecting grief and uncertainty. The queen was unresponsive to stimuli, her breathing shallow and erratic, her complexion ash-colored from age and ailment. The fervor that once animated her had dwindled to a faint glimmer. Lady Scrow, a devoted companion, refused to depart, offering solace by holding her hand and soothing her with rose-water dampened linen. Others present whispered prayers, seeking guidance in this unprecedented situation. Richmond Palace exuded an air of tension, awaiting an official announcement that had yet to be made. Until the very end, nobody had the courage to announce her death. Messengers were stationed at the gates, ready to depart to Scotland as soon as it was confirmed in order to inform James VI, who was next in line for the throne. Inside the room, time seemed to slow down. The minutes felt like hours, and nobody dared to discuss what would happen next. Even Robert Seel, the main architect behind the peaceful transition to the House of Stuart, stood motionless, holding his documents. His most significant political strategy, the uniting of England and Scotland under one rule, was on the verge of happening, contingent upon a dying woman. Then, in the early hours of March the 24th, 1603, it occurred. There was no sound, no gasp, just silence. The room remained still for a moment, as though everyone feared the deceased might suddenly breathe again. Lady Scrow delicately covered the Queen's face with a cloth. It was the end. Elizabeth I had passed away. Her death was not accompanied by grand gestures or final sacraments from a priest, all of which she had rejected. Known as the Virgin Queen, she had departed in solitude, surrounded not by loved ones or successors, but by the weight of history. A ruler born amidst scandal, who had governed through tumultuous times, was now immortalized with the same grace she displayed in life. Silent, resolute, and ultimately enigmatic, Elizabeth I's demise sent a shiver throughout the land, not due to its suddenness, but because of the aftermath. A vacant throne, a directionless court, and a realm uncertain of what would follow. To many in England, she had been their only sovereign. Her presence had become intertwined with daily life, her likeness imprinted on currency and conscience. Following her passing, her body remained motionless, untouched. Her ladies adhered to tradition by standing vigil next to her, softly reciting psalms. A lone candle flickered by her side. The covering over her face did not obscure her identity. Instead, it preserved it, allowing the nation one last moment to accept her departure. While grief enveloped Richmond elsewhere, plans were already in motion. Robert Seel, the one person truly grasping the significance of the event, sprang into action. Through his clandestine correspondences with James V, 6th of Scotland, preparation for this day had been made. Urgent messengers were dispatched, racing along muddy spring roads, carrying news that would alter the course of two kingdoms. Meanwhile, in London, the populace awaited news, unaware of the Queen's passing. No bells tolled, no official mourning commenced. The court withheld the news for hours, fearing unrest or power struggles. However, the information gradually leaked out, starting with servants before spreading to merchants and clergy. With the Queen's departure, the Tudor line also ended. Without a direct heir, the hope rested on her assumed choice being honored. In quiet deliberation, the Privy Council discussed the fragile situation, as the kingdom urgently required leadership. Fears of internal strife, Catholic rebellion, and foreign interference loomed large. Memories of violent successions haunted their minds. Nevertheless, despite the Queen's prolonged silence, the government had made preparations. Shortly after her demise, the council announced James V, 6th of Scotland, as the new monarch, James I of England, heralding the dawn of a new dynasty. However, even as the nation embarked on this new chapter, uncertainty prevailed. As the future unfolded, it grieved the loss of a woman who had significantly influenced an era, leaving a void that no royal title could fill. Following the council's declaration of James V, 6th as James I of England, attention turned to the arrangements for Queen Elizabeth I's physical remains. Throughout her rule, she had meticulously curated her public image, but with her passing, the facade she maintained began to fade. Her elaborate attire, white lead makeup, and vibrant wigs had concealed her true appearance, which now became visible as her attendants prepared her body for burial. Despite her efforts to project strength and authority, the signs of aging and illness, along with the effects of her heavy makeup, were evident on her skin. Her once adorned hands and thinning white hair betrayed the toll that decades of ruling had taken on her. Elizabeth I's mortality became apparent in her final moments, revealing a human vulnerability beneath her regal exterior. She was no longer the iconic figure known as Gloriana, or the distant monarch depicted in portraits. She was a woman burdened by the weight of a kingdom and the toll it had taken on her health. Initially, no embalming was performed in accordance with contemporary customs. The decision was made to postpone the burial to accommodate a period of national mourning and to hold a proper ceremony. Her deceased body was presented to the public, adorned in royal attire one last time, with a crown on her head and holding an orb and scepter. Despite her flaws being visible, the citizens came to pay their respects, not only to the queen she once was, but also to the person she had evolved into. Elizabeth I, a woman of contrasts, strong and solitary, intelligent and burdened, fierce and delicate. Although her facade had faded, what remained was not any less majestic, only more authentic. On April 28, 1603, over a month after her passing, Elizabeth I was finally laid to rest. The delay was not due to carelessness, but out of utmost respect. England had lost its longest reigning monarch ever, and her departure warranted a ceremony befitting the grandeur of her legacy. The funeral procession commenced from Whitehall and advanced slowly towards Westminster Abbey. The streets of London were lined with mourners from all walks of life. There were no festivities, just the tolling of bells and the sound of footsteps on the cobblestones. The coffin, draped in velvet, was carried on a large carriage drawn by 4 horses. At the front was an effigy of Elizabeth I, clothed in regal garments with a crown, orb, and scepter, appearing serene as if still watching over her subjects. Many mistook the effigy for her actual body, standing upright in eternal repose. Following the carriage were an honor guard, members of her court, parliamentarians, and foreign envoys. Each footstep resonated with solemnity. As the procession progressed, the weight of the transition was palpable as a queen was laid to rest, signifying the end of an entire era. At Westminster Abbey, she was buried next to her half-sister, Mary I, symbolizing a reunion between 2 queens who had once been divided by religion and rivalry. The inscription on their tomb reads, "Partners in throne and grave. Here rest we 2 sisters, Elizabeth and Mary, in the hope of one resurrection," a poignant reminder of their complicated relationship. Historians couldn't help but note the irony of their enmity in life, contrasting with their proximity in death. Beyond mourning a monarch, the funeral marked the conclusion of the Tudor dynasty. Elizabeth's passing signaled the end of an era that had ushered England out of the Wars of the Roses and into a period of exploration, cultural growth, and national pride. With the closing of Westminster Abbey's doors, the Elizabethan age drew to a close, paving the way for a new chapter shaped by different leadership and a different monarchy. Over 4 centuries have elapsed since Elizabeth I's passing, yet the circumstances surrounding her death remain shrouded in mystery. While other monarchs met their end in battles or due to clear illnesses, Elizabeth's decline was cloaked in secrecy, leading scholars, physicians, and curious minds to speculate about the cause of the Virgin Queen's demise. The prevailing theory attributes her death to old age, as she had surpassed the life expectancy of her peers and endured numerous personal losses during her reign. Her reluctance to eat, drink, or rest likely hastened her decline, compounded by the absence of modern medical treatments that could have prevented a minor ailment from turning fatal. Another plausible conjecture points to pneumonia as a contributing factor, with reports suggesting she had caught a chill shortly before her death. Before reaching her final decline, Elizabeth I may have been affected by the cold, damp conditions in Richmond Palace, which, combined with her weakened state, could have facilitated the development of an infection. The absence of antibiotics and adequate treatments at the time meant that pneumonia would have been incredibly damaging. Some scholars also suggest the possibility of lead poisoning as an alternative explanation. Elizabeth's use of white makeup, known as Venetian Suze, contained white lead, a toxic substance that could have been absorbed by her skin. Over time, this could have harmed her organs, caused mental changes, and slowly poisoned her internally. Symptoms like fatigue, irritability, and cognitive decline align with modern knowledge of the effects of chronic lead exposure. Additionally, the chance of blood poisoning from an infected tooth or saw cannot be ruled out. Elizabeth's dental health was notoriously poor, characterized by tooth loss and decay. A minor infection could have easily entered her bloodstream, causing septicemia, a deadly condition in an age lacking understanding of germs or sterilization methods. Furthermore, historians explore the emotional and psychological impact of grief and depression on her well-being. The loss of close confidants like Robert Devo seemed to have deeply affected her. Her refusal to rest, prolonged periods of silence, and intense sorrow could all indicate significant psychological distress that, if left untreated, might have expedited her decline. In reality, a combination of these elements, age, sickness, poisoning, sorrow, likely contributed to her deteriorating health. As a sovereign who bore the weight of an empire, Elizabeth I may have ultimately succumbed to its burden. However, in her silence, she left behind a legacy, not a mere record of a life, but of an identity that had been woven into England for over 4 decades. Reigning without a spouse or offspring, she had imprinted her image onto the very essence of her nation. Her passing, marked by quietness, privacy, and numerous unanswered questions, was not just the end of a life, but of an era, a reflection of the enduring impact she had on England. Despite the questions that linger, the reverberation of her rule resonated through the centuries that ensued. The nation she bequeathed was notably different from the one she inherited. In 1558, upon ascending the throne, England was torn by religious conflicts, imperiled by external threats, and on the brink of chaos. Elizabeth I, through sheer determination, political acumen, and captivating leadership, reshaped it into a formidable realm, self-assured, culturally dynamic, and esteemed globally. However, her passing laid bare the vulnerability hidden beneath the surface. By sheer force of charisma and presence, she had preserved unity. Her absence threatened to revive old rifts, but the smooth transition to James I signified a diplomatic triumph, albeit a significant change. The era of the Tudors had ended, and uncertainty loomed with the rise of the Stuarts. Nevertheless, what truly endured in the hearts of her subjects was not merely the politics, but her persona, her speeches at Tilbury, her resolute refusal of marriage, the crafted image of the unwed queen, the dazzling jewels, exquisite gowns, regal demeanor, and eloquent oratory all became legendary. Even her final silence cemented her legacy. Exiting the world on her own terms, she uttered no farewell, seeking neither a final plea for remembrance nor pity. While alive, she mastered theatrics. In death, her silence resonated louder than any final performance. Though historians still scrutinize her passing, few dispute her influence. The Elizabethan era endures as a revered epoch in English history, her name symbolizing a golden age of poetry, exploration, and national pride. While she rests peacefully beneath Westminster Abbey, her tale perseveres in literature, theater, and the essence of the monarchy. She was once a ruler who passed away in solitude, yet she was not forgotten. In a time long before chocolate bars were stocked on grocery store shelves and hot cocoa was savored to warm hands in winter, cacao had a different significance altogether. It wasn't sweet or consumed in solid form. Rather, it was savored as a bitter, frothy, and sacred drink. For the ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica, this peculiar and potent bean symbolized more than just taste. It embodied profound meaning. Our narrative commences over 3,000 years ago, in the lush, tropical rainforests of present-day southern Mexico. The Olmec people, recognized as one of the earliest sophisticated societies in the Americas, were presumed to be among the first to nurture the cacao tree. Although much of their past remains veiled in mystery, researchers speculate that the Olmec utilized cacao in ceremonies and perhaps as a ceremonial beverage, imbibed by esteemed leaders or spiritual guides. This was no ordinary drink. It carried spiritual significance. However, it was with the rise of the Maya civilization that cacao truly ascended to a divine status. The Maya, who reigned over a vast territory in Central America between 250 and 900 CE, revered cacao as a sacred plant, gifted by the divine beings. According to their legends, cacao was a present from the gods of creation, an essential element in the origin of human existence. In the Popol Vuh, a revered Maya text, it is recounted how the gods fashioned humans from maize and cacao, intertwining them with the natural world. Cacao was reserved for significant occasions. Priests incorporated it into religious rituals, while elites sipped it during extravagant banquets. It was believed to revive the soul and provide a link to the divine realm. When served chilled and blended with chili, spices, or cornmeal, the cacao beverage was luxurious, potent, and invigorating. It was often poured back and forth between containers to create a frothy top, a symbol of status and excellence. Yet, the intrinsic worth of cacao transcended mere physical pleasure. The Maya considered cacao beans as a form of currency in their markets, with a few beans buying simple items like tamales, and 100 beans able to purchase more valuable items such as turkeys. The beans were treasured, traded, and even replicated using clay. Chocolate was not merely a delicacy to the Maya, but was viewed as essential for life, power, wealth, and reverence. It was revered as the drink of the gods, coursing through the veins of rulers and religious figures. The bitter and captivating flavor of chocolate marked the beginning of a fascinating culinary journey in human history. Within Maya society, cacao held a deeper significance beyond just a beverage, representing a symbol of divine harmony ingrained in their daily routines and cosmic beliefs. This seemingly insignificant bean from the jungle was considered a sacred element, capable of bridging mortals with deities, the earth, and the afterlife. Cacao played a significant role in important events across major Maya cities, such as Tikal and Copan. From royal coronations to marital unions and funerary rites, cacao was present. The consumption of cacao during religious rituals was mainly limited to the priestly and elite classes, prepared with ingredients like chili peppers, maize, vanilla, and sometimes blood, creating a powerful elixir meant to invigorate the soul and induce spiritual experiences. It was believed that consuming cacao facilitated a closer connection to the divine, enhancing the mind for prophecy and sacred revelations. Additionally, the Maya held the cacao trees in high regard, perceiving their branches and pods as symbols of vitality, fertility, and abundance. Depicted in art alongside gods and ancestors, cacao was deeply intertwined with Maya culture and spirituality. Depicted on various artifacts like painted ceramics and carved sculptures are scenes illustrating kings presenting cacao to deities or gods emerging from cacao pods, symbolizing a divine origin. Cacao held significance not only in religious rituals, but also in social and economic contexts. When hosting guests, cacao was offered, and drinking it together symbolized negotiations for peace. Sharing cacao signified acknowledging shared humanity among the Maya, establishing an implicit agreement of trust, respect, and common goals. In affluent households, the act of consuming cacao was ceremonial, using intricately decorated vessels such as painted cups adorned with symbols denoting the owner and the drink's purpose. These vessels were not mere utensils, but treasured items meticulously crafted with esteem. The Mayas' reverence for cacao played a crucial role in shaping their cultural identity, marking it as more than just a beverage, but a revered connection, revered as a mediator between different realms in a society governed by rituals and cosmic rhythms. Many centuries later, the Aztecs would further elevate the status of cacao. By the time Hernán Cortés and the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 1500s, cacao held a multifaceted role within the Aztec Empire. Beyond being a spiritual emblem or a luxury commodity, it served as a form of currency, a medicinal resource, and a royal delicacy. Due to the unsuitable climate around their capital city of Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs acquired cacao through trade or demanded it as tribute from conquered territories in warmer regions to maintain a steady supply. These cacao beans were stored in sprawling granaries functioning akin to contemporary banks, with each bean holding a specific value used for various transactions. For instance, a small rabbit could be exchanged for 10 beans, while a turkey hen might cost 100 beans. Even the wages of servants and resolution of debts were settled in cacao beans. In Aztec society, counterfeiting a cacao bean by hollowing it out and filling it with dirt was considered a grave offense due to the preciousness of cacao, which was as highly prized as gold. The significance of cacao extended beyond its economic value. Referred to as zocalato, cacao was honored as a beverage for warriors and was exclusively consumed by the elite, including nobles, priests, and military leaders, but not by the commoners. It was prepared with water, chili, and occasionally maize, believed to provide energy and mental acuity prior to battles. Emperor Montezuma II purportedly drank up to 50 cups daily, viewing it as an aphrodisiac and a source of vigor. Cacao played a pivotal role in religious rituals, with offerings made to deities such as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, who, according to legend, bestowed cacao upon humanity after purloining it from paradise. The belief in the divine origins of cacao underscored the sacred nature of drinking it correctly. In Aztec culture, cacao symbolized affluence, conflict, adoration, and monarchy, signifying a symbol of power acquired, pilfered, exchanged, and respected. However, these beliefs clashed with the arrival of European colonization. Upon their initial encounter with the cacao bean, the Spanish failed to appreciate its worth, an oversight soon to be rectified. The fierce elixir consumed by warriors and monarchs was on the brink of crossing the seas, where it would undergo a permanent transformation, becoming sweetened, commercialized, and integrated into a global craze. When Hernán Cortés and his troops reached the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in 1519, they were astounded by the foreign yet magnificent world they encountered, replete with grand temples, floating gardens, and bustling markets. Amidst the marvels, the Europeans were repeatedly captivated by the peculiar consumption of a dark, bitter beverage derived from crushed beans. They observed as Montezuma II was served cup after cup in a fascinating spectacle. In golden containers, the Aztecs stored a substance known as xylitol, which was treated with great respect by warriors, nobles, and priests. Initially, they found it to be strange, unsweetened, and spicy, leading some to consider it unappealing. Despite this, they also recognized its ability to provide energy, stimulate alertness, and hold significant symbolic value in Aztec society. Following the conquest and fall of the empire, Cortés didn't just bring back gold and silver to Spain, but also cacao beans and the knowledge of processing them. This introduction of chocolate to Europe began as a novelty at the Spanish court, reserved as a precious gem from the New World. Initially, monasteries prepared it in the traditional way, exclusively for nobles and royalty. The European taste differed, and the introduction of sugar transformed the bitter cacao drink into a sweet delight, igniting a culinary revolution. The addition of sweeteners turned the once sacred and spicy beverage of warriors into a luxurious and fashionable treat. Chocolate transitioned from a ritualistic tribute to a symbol of wealth and refinement in Spain, and subsequently throughout Europe. Aristocrats savored it at social gatherings, while royalty insisted on having it at their banquets. Although still consumed as a beverage, typically hot, its taste became milder, and the original rites were replaced by recipes. The authority, once associated with deities and warriors, now lay with the European upper class. While chocolate pleased the aristocracy's taste buds, it also brought a new bitterness, not in flavor, but in the exploitation and slavery that arose to meet the increasing demand for cacao and sugar in Europe. The introduction of the divine beverage to a new realm marked a significant change that would endure forever. Chocolate, which once held religious significance in Mesoamerican rituals, had, by the 17th century, transitioned into a sought-after European luxury item. However, beneath this pleasant evolution, a dark reality was emerging. The combination of cocoa and sugar, a delightful blend for European tastes, also played a pivotal role in fueling the brutal transatlantic slave trade, one of history's most horrific systems. With the rising European appetite for chocolate came an increased need for raw cocoa. The tropical regions of South America, Central America, and the Caribbean provided ideal conditions for cultivating cocoa trees. But the labor-intensive process of harvesting was necessary. Cocoa pods had to be hand-picked, opened, and the beans needed to be fermented, dried, and roasted. Similarly, sugarcane cultivation demanded rigorous labor. To maximize profits, colonial powers resorted to slavery. The Portuguese, Spanish, French, Dutch, and British all engaged in establishing plantation economies that relied on enslaved workers. Countless Africans were captured, transported across the Atlantic, and subjected to harsh conditions on plantations in Brazil, the Caribbean, and later West Africa. Many spent their lives tending to cocoa and sugar crops without ever experiencing the sweet treats their labor produced. The devastating toll on humanity was profound. Families were torn apart, cultures were obliterated, and entire generations endured immense suffering in the pursuit of chocolate and sugar. Despite the immense human cost, aristocrats in London, Paris, and Madrid casually indulged in hot chocolate, often oblivious or indifferent to the harrowing stories behind the cocoa beans. The commercialization of cocoa symbolized a significant shift. It evolved from a sacred offering to a global commodity, subject to trade, taxation, and profit-making. The demand for chocolate only intensified as the Industrial Revolution loomed closer. What had initially started as a spiritual libation, formerly a product of reverence and ceremony, chocolate had now become intertwined with empire and exploitation. Once representing a divine connection, its taste now left behind a bitter residue of blood, suffering, and systemic injustice. Despite this dark history, the allure of chocolate continued to grow, associated with luxury, love, and pleasure, while its past of labor and suffering was obscured by sweetness and richness. The narrative surrounding chocolate had evolved to focus on power, profit, and the individuals who had been sacrificed in its production. Initially served as a liquid luxury in royal courts and elegant salons for centuries, chocolate was on the brink of a significant transformation as Europe entered the Industrial Revolution in the early 1800s. This era saw a surge of innovation with mechanization and mass production revolutionizing various industries, including food. In 1828, Dutch chemist Coenraad Johannes Vanten invented a groundbreaking process using a hydraulic press to extract cacao butter from roasted cacao beans, resulting in a dry cake that could be ground into a fine powder. This powder could dissolve easily in water and blend smoothly with sugar, making chocolate more affordable, lighter, and easier to produce. This innovation led to the creation of Dutch cocoa, setting the stage for solid chocolate. Taking it a step further in 1847, the British company Fry and Sons combined cacao powder, cacao butter, and sugar to produce the world's first modern chocolate bar, a smooth, moldable, and portable version of the traditional drink. This marked a significant shift as chocolate could now be held in hand instead of sipped from a cup. The Swiss entered the picture in the 1870s when Daniel Peter revolutionized chocolate by blending condensed milk to create a creamier and sweeter version of the traditional bar. Rolf Lindt, Peter's rival and friend, developed the coning machine, which perfected chocolate's texture through slow churning, resulting in the luxurious smoothness we now associate with top-quality chocolate. These innovations transformed chocolate from a luxury item into a widely available product. As prices dropped and texture improved, chocolate ceased to be exclusively enjoyed by royalty and became accessible to the masses, making its way into shops, factories, and lunchboxes throughout Europe and eventually the United States. Major companies like Cadbury, Nestle, and Hershey scaled up chocolate production to levels never seen before, incorporating colorful and playful packaging. Marketing campaigns highlighted joy, indulgence, and the wonder of childhood. Yet, in the process of sweetening, democratizing, and solidifying chocolate, some of its original essence was lost. Once a revered beverage of the gods, chocolate had evolved into a mere treat, stripped of its ancient significance and ceremonial aspects. Nevertheless, a new era had begun, in which chocolate would capture the hearts of people worldwide. By the early 20th century, chocolate had established itself globally, not just as a delicacy, but as a full-fledged industry. Originating from a sacred elixir among ancient societies, chocolate had now turned into a worldwide sensation, driven by factories, advertising, and the relentless gears of global capitalism. In the United States, chocolate took on a distinctively American character, with Milton Hershey's innovations in the late 1800s. Applying mass production techniques to chocolate akin to Henry Ford's methods with automobiles, Hershey's Pennsylvania factory churned out affordable milk chocolate for the everyday American, not just the wealthy. By 1900, the iconic Hershey bar was introduced, sparking a new era of American adoration for chocolate. Chocolate was evolving beyond being a mere commodity. It was transforming into a symbol. Soldiers even carried it into battle. War was a concept that children exchanged on playgrounds, featured in cookbooks, and associated with various holidays and romantic gestures. Chocolate emerged as a symbolic representation for Valentine's Day, Halloween, and Easter, embodying feelings of love, comfort, and nostalgia. To meet the rising demand, multinational corporations expanded the cultivation of cacao, with West Africa, particularly Ghana and the Ivory Coast, emerging as leading global centers for cacao production, surpassing Latin America. These regions, which had a history of colonialism and slavery, now supplied more than 70% of the world's cacao, often under exploitative conditions. Despite ongoing issues like child labor and low wages in cacao-growing areas, chocolate's popularity continued to soar. In Japan, it evolved into a sophisticated art form, with delicate bonbons exchanged with great care. Switzerland took pride in its chocolate heritage, with brands like Toblerone and Lindt setting the standard for quality. In Mexico, chocolate returned to its ancient traditions, being used in dishes like mole, blending bitter and savory flavors seamlessly. The global chocolate culture, a blend of indigenous customs and modern influences, showcased how chocolate had woven itself into the fabric of humanity, celebrated and enjoyed in diverse ways around the world. In the midst of industrialization and global expansion, the rich history of chocolate had largely faded from memory. Once revered for its sacred significance, chocolate had been reduced to a mass-produced snack enjoyed by many. However, in recent times, a new movement has emerged, seeking to rediscover chocolate's origins and reconnect with the essence of the cacao bean. In the early 2000s, a significant shift towards artisanal chocolate emerged, influenced by trends in coffee, wine, and slow food. Across the globe, artisans and chocolate makers started pondering the origins of their chocolate, its growers, and its original taste, before being masked by sugar and additives. This exploration led them to the cacao bean, contrasting with mass-produced chocolate that often combines beans from various sources. Craft chocolate emphasizes single-origin cacao, preserving distinct flavors tied to specific regions, soils, and fermentation techniques. For instance, beans from Madagascar may boast fruity and citrusy hints, while those from Ecuador might carry floral or nutty undertones. It became apparent that chocolate, akin to wine, possesses terroir. This renewed interest extended beyond flavor, touching upon ethics as well. Increased awareness shed light on labor injustices in cacao production, such as child labor and unfair wages. In response, many artisanal chocolate makers began collaborating directly with farmers, paying premium prices for ethically cultivated high-quality beans. Terms like fair trade, direct trade, and rainforest alliance emerged to promote a fairer and more sustainable supply chain. Simultaneously, chefs and food historians revisited ancient Mesoamerican cacao applications. Traditional beverages from Mexico and Guatemala, incorporating cacao, chili, and maize, saw a resurgence. Indigenous communities shared ancestral recipes, emphasizing that chocolate's origins lie not in factories, but in forests. Subsequently, museums, literature, and culinary journeys began to showcase chocolate as more than just a treat, but as a cultural symbol, rich in tradition, adversity, and narrative. While the chocolate world evolved, its essence remained true, a product of hand-cultivated trees, meticulously prepared and shared with significance. Chocolate, once prompted, resumed speaking not only as a delightful treat, but also as a reminder of the past. Today, chocolate is ubiquitous, seen at gatherings, in vending machines, within baked goods, and in high-end kitchens. It symbolizes affection, opulence, and solace. However, behind its smooth exterior lies a complex history filled with tales of deities, kingdoms, happiness, exploitation, customs, and innovation. Chocolate, arguably more than any other food, reflects the evolution of society itself. It has been present in sacred rituals of ancient civilizations and in the battles of Aztec soldiers, from enslaved workers on colonial farms to aristocratic European soirees. From being part of military rations to becoming a staple of Valentine's Day customs, chocolate has accompanied humanity through various eras, evolving continuously. Its significance is multifaceted. On one hand, chocolate embodies creativity, adaptability, and cultural fusion, showcasing how ingredients from different parts of the world can combine to create something novel. It has inspired creativity, scientific research, and progress. On the flip side, there is a darker aspect. Despite efforts to raise awareness and implement ethical standards, issues such as deforestation, underpayment, and child labor persist within the cacao supply chain. Additionally, the voices of the indigenous communities who revered cacao as sacred have been disregarded due to colonization, only now beginning to resurface and receive recognition. Every time we indulge in a chocolate truffle or have a sip of hot cocoa, we are, whether consciously or not, interacting with that rich and sometimes painful backstory. Yet, despite the challenges, chocolate, despite its paradoxes, has the power to bring people together regardless of language, borders, or beliefs. It serves as a source of joy, comfort, celebration, and endurance. Chocolate's legacy lies not only in its taste, but also in its capacity to adapt and survive through the changing tides of civilizations. From its rituals to recipes, and from its seeds to its symbolism, chocolate has always carried deeper meanings. It is more than just a treat. it is a narrative that we are continuously crafting. The United States was a burgeoning nation in the early 19th century, filled with ambition and a surging population. White settlers sought opportunities in the American frontier, believing it was their divine right. However, as they ventured westward, they intruded upon lands rooted in the memories, cultures, and lives of Native American nations. These lands belonged to sovereign communities like the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Choctaw, and Sioux tribes, which had intricate political systems, written languages, newspapers, and schools. These were not scattered nomadic groups, but cohesive societies that had long sought coexistence with the United States on legal and diplomatic terms. The Cherokee Nation, for instance, had integrated many aspects of American society to maintain their autonomy, such as adopting a constitution mirroring that of the U.S., engaging in agriculture, converting to Christianity, publishing a bilingual newspaper, and sending delegates to Washington. Despite these efforts at assimilation, white settlers and politicians remained focused on acquiring native lands. Southern states like Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi intensified their encroachment on native territories by enacting laws that undermined tribal governance and property rights. The pressure mounted on the federal government to take action, particularly after the discovery of gold in northern Georgia, which intensified the urgency. Advocates argued that the valuable land should not remain in the hands of the Native Americans. President Andrew Jackson, a former general and a strong proponent of relocation, proposed a solution to clear the east of Native nations completely. The plan was to move them beyond the Mississippi River to ensure they would no longer impede the progress of cotton plantations and white settlements. This approach was not just a policy, but an ideological belief rooted in manifest destiny, though not yet termed as such, which permeated the essence of the American endeavor. The concept that white Americans were fated to expand from one coast to the other was pursued at the cost of those who stood in their way, including entire nations in the 1830s. Thus, the Trail of Tears was set in motion, leading to one of the saddest and most disgraceful episodes in American history. On May 28, 1830, President Andrew Jackson enacted the Indian Removal Act, a law that would profoundly impact the lives of thousands of Native Americans. Although disguised in language emphasizing fairness and voluntary agreements, the act inaugurated a systematic and unyielding effort to displace Native tribes from their traditional lands in the southeastern United States. It empowered the president to negotiate treaties with Native nations, trading their lands east of the Mississippi River for territories in what was then referred to as Indian Territory, later known as Oklahoma. Proponents of the law claimed it aimed to safeguard Native peoples from extinction by relocating them far away from white encroachment. However, in reality, it was a disguised land acquisition strategy under the guise of protection. Celebrated as a military hero for his harsh military campaigns against the viewed as a natural extension of American expansion by Creek and Sioux. The concept of removal was perceived as a way to ensure peaceful coexistence between white settlers and Native peoples. They argued that Native nations lacked the necessary qualities for cohabitation, emphasizing that removal was not only advantageous but unavoidable. They lack the intelligence, work ethic, moral values, and aspiration for progress. They once remarked about indigenous communities, suggesting that survival depended on either perishing or leaving their territories for the wilderness. Despite a divided Congress, the removal bill narrowly passed, with a mere 3-vote margin in the Senate and a 5-vote margin in the House of Representatives, initiating one of the most tragic chapters in American history. While some tribes chose relocation due to fear of conflict or further losses, others hesitated, trusting in treaty assurances of compensation, provisions, and safe travel. However, many of these guarantees turned out to be empty. The implementation of the removal process was disorderly, harsh, and frequently enforced through violence, transforming what was supposed to be a peaceful transition into a nightmare of deceit, misconduct, and forced displacements. Entire communities were displaced, houses razed, and crops ruined, as families were instructed by soldiers to quickly gather their belongings, while settlers eagerly awaited to claim the vacated land. The Indian Removal Act not only altered geographical boundaries, but also ruptured ancestral connections, shattered lives, and revealed a brutal reality. American expansion thrived not solely on optimism, but on anguish. Amid mounting pressure on numerous tribes to sign removal treaties, the Cherokee Nation opted for a different approach, preferring a strategy rooted in legal avenues instead of conflict. They staunchly defended their autonomy, taking their case to the United States courts, employing the very legal framework that had been exploited against them. Principal Chief John Ross guided the Cherokee in drafting a constitution, establishing a formal government, and asserting their sovereignty within the United States. They aimed to demonstrate their similarity to the American Republic to safeguard their land. Their defiance resulted in 2 significant Supreme Court cases. In the case of Cherokee Nation versus Georgia in 1831, the Cherokee sought legal protection against Georgia's unjust laws that stripped them of their rights and territory. Chief Justice John Marshall's court ruled that the Cherokee lacked the standing to sue, as they were not considered a foreign nation, a severe setback. However, the following year, the tide turned in the case of Worcester versus Georgia in 1832, with the court ruling in favor of the Cherokee, affirming that Georgia had no authority over Cherokee lands, and that only the federal government could negotiate with native nations. Despite this brief moment of justice, President Andrew Jackson's response was one of defiance, ignoring the court's decision and allowing Georgia to disregard it. While there is debate about whether Jackson actually said, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now, let him enforce it," his actions spoke louder, refusing to uphold the court's ruling. The Cherokee, though hesitant, persisted in resisting removal treaties, but internal disagreements arose. A minority group within the Cherokee, led by Major Ridge, John Ridge, and Elias Boudreaux, believed removal was inevitable and signed the unauthorized Treaty of New Echota in 1835. This treaty, narrowly approved by the U.S. Senate, sealed their fate. The Cherokee Nation was forced to endure a difficult time, as the Treaty of New Echota, which was opposed by the majority, was declared as valid. This led to the Cherokee facing military action in the spring of 1838, under President Martin Van Buren's orders, with federal troops and state militias descending upon their lands. With negotiations no longer an option, removal became official policy, and soldiers were sent to enforce it. Families across several states were abruptly removed from their homes, with soldiers arriving at short notice, giving them little time to gather their belongings before being displaced. The soldiers pillaged and burned their homes, leaving behind abandoned churches, schools, and burial grounds. Over 16,000 Cherokee were forced into crowded and unsanitary military camps, where diseases like measles, dysentery, and whooping cough spread rapidly. The harsh journey, known as the Trail of Tears, covered roughly 100 to 200 miles, with Cherokee enduring extreme weather conditions and challenging terrain as they made their way to the Indian Territory. Amidst vast landscapes of prairies, devastating tragedies unfolded. The elderly succumbed, while children perished in the arms of their mothers. Entire families disappeared along the journey, laid to rest in unmarked shallow graves by the roadside. Some attempted to preserve their dignity by singing prayers, carrying sacred items, and documenting the names of those lost. Nevertheless, the overwhelming sorrow was too much to bear. Hunger weakened them, and winter's cold pierced through their scant clothing. The guards were merciless. By the arrival of the last group in what is now Oklahoma in early 1839, it is estimated that more than 4,000 Cherokee had lost their lives, almost a quarter of their entire population. This was not merely a relocation, it was a brutal march to death, a forced obliteration of their identity, homeland, and aspirations. When the final group of Cherokee reached Indian Territory in March 1839, the journey concluded, but the anguish persisted. The losses suffered along the Trail of Tears reached far beyond the 4,000 fatalities caused by disease, exposure, and famine. More than individuals perished on that path. A way of life, a spiritual connection to the land, and the cultural continuity of a whole nation perished. The trauma resonated through generations. The survivors arrived feeble, shattered, and mourning. They had lost elders who held ancestral wisdom, children who embodied future dreams, and leaders who had shielded their people with unwavering strength. There were no rituals for the departed, no time to grieve. The land they were compelled to settle was unfamiliar and often hostile. The assurances of protection, provisions, and fertile grounds pledged by the U.S. government were inconsistently observed or completely disregarded. The physical wounds mirrored the emotional scars. The Cherokee had been a proud nation with educational institutions, printing presses, and a constitution. They had placed their trust in the legal system, believing that justice would safeguard them. Yet their faith had been betrayed. Betrayed and denied justice, their rights stripped away, divisions deepened among the survivors. Considered traitors by many, the Treaty Party, who had signed the Treaty of New Yacht, faced retribution as Major Ridge, John Ridge, and Elias Boudinot were assassinated by fellow Cherokee in June 1839. The nation's unity, already shattered by relocation, suffered further due to internal conflicts. Yet amid devastation, the Cherokee persevered by rebuilding schools, reinstating their government, and resuming newspaper publications. They clung to their language, stories, and faith, drawing upon their resilience to overcome adversity. The enduring scars of removal serve as a poignant reminder of their history. The Trail of Tears is more than a mere historical event, but a living memory ingrained in families, oral traditions, and the collective spirit of a displaced people. Although the Cherokee Trail of Tears is well known, it was not the lone forced relocation. Enacted in 1830, the Indian Removal Act targeted various Native American nations, each with unique languages, traditions, and territories, enduring their own forms of exile, pain, and grief. The Chow were the first to be uprooted, beginning in 1831 from Mississippi and Alabama. Facing harsh conditions without adequate provisions, many Chow perished during the grueling journey, characterized by freezing rains and treacherous rivers. A Chow leader later described it as a trail of tears and death, a phrase resonating through history. Following them, the once mighty Creek nation in the southeast suffered a similar fate. Following years of violating treaties and encountering conflict with settlers and militias, Native American tribes were also gathered up and forced to move westward. In 1836, more than 15,000 Creek people were relocated, with many being transported in restraints. Numerous individuals died during the journey, and some were enslaved or separated from their families. The Chickasaw tribe managed to negotiate compensation for their lands before relocation, but their journey was equally harsh. Challenges in receiving payment left them destitute, leading to the deaths of hundreds due to illness and hunger during the westward migration. The Seminole tribe in Florida put up significant resistance, engaging in guerrilla warfare against U.S. forces from 1835 to 1842, with leaders like Osceola becoming symbols of defiance. Despite their efforts, the Seminole were eventually overwhelmed by the superior military might of the U.S., resulting in thousands being captured or killed. Some were forcibly moved to Indian territory, while a small group sought refuge in the Everglades, where their descendants still live today. Overall, more than 100,000 Native Americans from various tribes were displaced during this era of forced removal. While the government labeled it as policy and settlers viewed it as progress, for indigenous peoples, it amounted to a catastrophe. Each tribe's journey had its own unique challenges, but they all experienced common themes of betrayal, hardship, and grief. Ancestral lands were confiscated, cultural hubs were destroyed, and the fabric of community, family, and heritage was severely strained. Despite this turmoil, these tribes carried their traditions, languages, and resilience with them to a new land that did not welcome them, but where they found ways to endure. Upon reaching Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole encountered a landscape vastly different from their original homes. The federal government had promised fertile land, protection from further encroachments, and permanent ownership of their new territories. Upon arriving in their new homes, the promises made proved to be fragile yet again. The unfamiliar land and harsh climate made it challenging for many to grow crops or rebuild using traditional methods. Communities faced bitter winters, unpredictable summers, and devastating droughts that scorched the earth. Diseases like cholera, smallpox, and influenza spread, bringing grief to every settlement. The government aid, which included livestock, tools, food, and money, often arrived late or not at all, with corruption rampant in the system. The guaranteed Indian homeland soon came under threat as settlers advanced westward and state borders encroached. Despite these challenges, indigenous nations worked hard to rebuild by reestablishing their capitals, reorganizing governments, writing new constitutions, and rebuilding institutions. They began to heal and persevere, facing the shadow of removal that still loomed over them. Even in their so-called territory, promises of protection were vulnerable to greed, expansion, and disregard, as the native people were not seen as permanent, rightful inhabitants. Though seeking peace, history would soon reveal a different reality. The Trail of Tears did not culminate in Indian territory. Instead, it symbolized the start of a new arduous chapter in the fight for survival, autonomy, and recognition. Following the forced relocations, the Trail of Tears was mostly shrouded in silence, mentioned discreetly, passed down through familial narratives, seldom acknowledged in educational materials or governmental discussions. It festered as an unhealed wound, a collective anguish borne quietly by indigenous communities, frequently disregarded by the nation responsible for its infliction. However, the memory endured. Within Cherokee households, elders recounted the westward march, recalling the cold, hunger, and losses. Laments were sung, and rituals were conducted in memory. Through spoken tales, the identities of those who journeyed and those who perished were kept alive. The landscape also bore reminiscence, ancient paths, shallow graves, and surviving records etched the path like a scar upon the heart of a continent. It was not merely a path of grief, it represented a path of resilience. The tenacity exhibited by native tribes post-relocation confounded the expectations of those who sought to obliterate them. Over subsequent years, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole not only reconstructed but thrived. They established new governance structures, operated educational institutions, published newspapers, and safeguarded their languages and spiritual customs. Despite the odds, they persevered. Nonetheless, external communities remained largely silent. It wasn't until the latter part of the 20th century that mainstream America began to acknowledge, albeit faintly, the tragedy of the Trail of Tears. Activists and tribal leaders endeavored to reintegrate the narrative into the national consciousness. Memorials were erected, commemorative paths were delineated, and school syllabi were gradually revised. The term Trail of Tears evolved into a recognized phrase, not solely within academic circles, but in the broader societal awareness. Yet recognition does not equate to reconciliation. The repercussions of displacement persist, echoing through native communities today, through severed ties to their ancestral lands, historical trauma, and unfulfilled promises. Despite enduring these challenges, indigenous nations exhibit a resilience that continues to thrive, the same fortitude that guided them through forests, across rivers, and into exile endures in initiatives to revive their language, preserve their culture, and pass down stories through generations. The Trail of Tears transcends mere loss. It embodies carried forward faith, memories, and an unwavering determination to survive. Today, it stands as more than a historical occurrence, but a poignant reminder of injustice, resilience, and the strength needed to propel a people forward in the face of adversity. What was once a path of sorrow has transformed into a sacred route of remembrance, marked by monuments, trails, and museums across the U.S. The Congress-mandated Trail of Tears, National Historic Trail, spanning over 5,000 miles through 9 states, retraces the forced migration journey, inviting visitors to briefly step into the footsteps of those who endured it. Nevertheless, genuine remembrance extends beyond physical markers, as tribal communities honor their ancestors through annual events, storytelling sessions, and language revitalization endeavors. The formerly silenced narrative is now proudly recounted in schools, depicted in films, and captured by writers and poets who illuminate the era's sorrow and resilience. Native youth are raised in a cultural environment where this legacy is taught, thus ensuring its perpetuation. The essence of the individual's identity goes beyond mere survival, as it is deeply rooted in courage, resistance, and continuity. However, there remains work to be done, as the Trail of Tears serves as a poignant reminder to re-examine how history is narrated and remembered. It challenges us to confront the consequences of expansion, the brutality embedded in policies, and the ongoing challenges confronted by indigenous communities. This historic event underscores the importance of humaneness in progress, emphasizing that advancement lacking compassion is not genuine progress, but erasure. Commemorating the Trail of Tears goes beyond retrospective acknowledgement. It entails actively listening, learning, and uplifting the voices that were previously marginalized. It acknowledges that the American narrative is incomplete without the stories of its native peoples, not solely in the past, but also in the present and in the chapters yet to unfold. Thus, we reflect on this history not just with sadness, but also with profound reverence, recognizing the resilience of a people who, despite betrayal and displacement, persevered and did not fade into obscurity. In the chilling cold of early 1692, Salem Village in Massachusetts was enveloped in an air of uneasiness. Nestled in the rugged wilderness of New England, this Puritan settlement was more than a cluster of farmlands and meeting places. It was a community on the brink of spiritual and social turmoil. Believing themselves to be chosen by God to lead righteous lives in a hazardous frontier, the people of Salem harbored underlying years of fear, tension, and discord. Abiding by a stringent religious doctrine, the Puritans subscribed to a worldview teeming with angels and demons. To them, the devil was not merely symbolic, but a tangible, malevolent presence. They held steadfast to the belief that witches could pact with the devil, wielding spells and corrupting. Questioning innocence in Salem was akin to questioning Scripture, and doubting a minister equated to challenging God. Reverend Samuel Parris, Salem's divisive minister, perceived sin in every corner and preached fiery sermons filled with warnings of damnation and demonic influences. His harsh demeanor and paranoid outlook caused rifts within the community, further strained by economic and political tensions between Salem Village and Salem Town. Land disputes and past grievances simmered beneath the surface, exacerbated by recent calamities like Native American attacks, crop failures, and smallpox outbreaks. These events were not seen as mere accidents, but as divine retribution for undisclosed transgressions. Against this backdrop of fear and suspicion, a group of young girls in Salem began displaying bizarre behavior, including fits and accusations of witchcraft that were taken seriously due to the prevalent belief in the existence of the devil. In 1692, the villagers felt that evil had descended upon them, leading to a series of tragic events, starting with the unusual actions of two young girls, Betty Parris and Abigail Williams, who exhibited disturbing behaviors such as screaming, contorting their bodies, and speaking incoherently, affected by mysterious forces unbeknownst to onlookers. The children's conditions puzzled the adults. Reverend Samuel Parris, Betty's father, initially viewed the behavior as unsettling but potentially treatable. After a local physician, William Griggs, assessed the girls and delivered a chilling prognosis of them being under a malevolent force. In a profoundly religious and superstitious society like Salem, the logical conclusion pointed to witchcraft. Subsequently, Additional young girls like Anne Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, and Elizabeth Hubbard also exhibited similar symptoms, capturing the village's attention as their episodes intensified. Despite being from esteemed families within the Puritan community, their claims carried weight. When pressured to reveal the source of their anguish, they took action that altered the course of the colony by accusing individuals, starting with Tituba, a Caribbean slave in the Paris residence. Tituba became an easy target due to her foreign origin, non-white ethnicity, and connection to practices perceived as suspicious by Puritans. Alongside Tituba, the girls accused two local women, Sarah Good, a destitute beggar, and Sarah Osborne, who defied societal norms by shunning church attendance and marrying her servant. These three women, each vulnerable in distinct ways, became the focal point of the town's suspicion, leading to their arrest and imprisonment. The community perceived this as a spiritual crisis, believing that identifying and eradicating any witches among them was essential. What initially seemed like an isolated ailment within a single household rapidly escalated into widespread fear and paranoia, transforming Salem into a place where no one, not even acquaintances or relatives, escaped scrutiny. Salem had plunged into a realm of terror. The closure of the trials would not come easily. In the early months of 1692, as hysteria spread to more villages and names were whispered in fear, Salem's courts started using a new form of evidence called spectral evidence, which had never been utilized in any English-speaking legal system before. This type of evidence became the most controversial and damning tool during the trials. Spectral evidence was based on the idea that a witch could send her spirit to harm victims from a distance. The afflicted girls would cry out in court, claiming to witness the accused person's ghost causing them harm, while the accused remained silent or in disbelief. Puritans believed this was not mere imagination, but valid proof of a pact with the devil. Denials of guilt were seen as lies, and silence was interpreted as an admission of guilt. Confessions, on the other hand, often spared individuals from execution, especially if they implicated others as witches. This led to many coerced confessions. Tituba, the first accused, confessed under pressure, claiming a tall man from Boston, hinting at the devil, had promised her freedom in exchange for service. Her detailed testimony of strange creatures and a witch's book signed by others fueled public fear and validated the girl's accusations. The debated nature of Tituba's confession, whether strategic, survival-driven, or partly imagined, remains uncertain, but had a significant impact, leading to more confessions and escalating the hysteria. Under duress, some confessed in the hope of mercy, while those who remained silent were often treated more severely than those who admitted wrongdoing. In the dimly lit courtrooms, the distinction between reality and imagination blurred. Rationality gave way to hysteria, as ministers cautioned for prudence, yet their advice was frequently disregarded. The prisons became crowded with the accused, ranging from farmers to midwives, churchgoers, and even children. Salem's justice system, formerly guided by religious teachings and structure, now seemed controlled by hallucinations, screams, and shadows. As accusations multiplied, the spring of 1692 saw Salem's jails inundated with prisoners. What began as a minor disruption within the community had escalated into a significant legal crisis, with over 100 individuals incarcerated and the colony grappling to manage the turmoil. Responding to the chaos, Massachusetts Governor William Phips established a special court known as the Court of Oyer and Terminer, designed specifically to handle witchcraft cases. This court, presided over by esteemed figures like William Stoughton, Samuel Sewall, and John Hathorne, struggled to contain the prevailing hysteria, as the strict rules of evidence were disregarded, allowing spectral testimonies and hearsay to play. Predominant roles, doubt and skepticism, were deemed perilous. The first individual to stand trial and be executed was Bridget Bishop, a woman long suspected of being outspoken and troublesome by her neighbors. Her vibrant attire and ownership of a tavern, coupled with past accusations of witchcraft, made her an ideal target. During her trial in June, the afflicted girls claimed to witness her spirit tormenting them in the courtroom. Despite her protestations of innocence, her steadfast denial was interpreted as an admission of guilt. Bridget was swiftly convicted and hanged on June 10, 1692, setting a precedent for the subsequent proceedings. As time passed, the process of making accusations, conducting trials, and carrying out executions hastened. Every week, additional individuals were presented to the court for judgment. Among them were respected members of society, such as churchgoers, midwives, and landowners, as well as those less fortunate like beggars, widows, and former servants. What linked them together was not their guilt, but rather the suspicion and, often, the misfortune of being disliked, envied, or simply misunderstood. Standing before a court where hope was scarce, the fate of the accused often relied on the dramatic performances of their accusers or the political climate of the era. Those who admitted guilt and accused others were typically spared, while those who maintained their innocence were more likely to face the gallows. Fear permeated every aspect of life in Salem during this period. Families turned against each other. Neighbors provided testimony to save themselves, and despite the warnings from ministers to exercise caution, their calls were drowned out by the demands for purification. Meanwhile, a gallows was erected on Proctor's Ledge just outside Salem, patiently awaiting the next trial, where names would be added to the toll. By the peak of the summer of 1692, Salem transformed from a town into a cauldron of terror, accusations, and zealous indignation. The witch trials extended their reach from Salem Village and Salem Town to neighboring communities like Ipswich, Andover, and Gloucester, spreading rapidly. With accusations mounting, prisons overflowing, and nobody immune from suspicion, individuals from all walks of life found themselves entangled in the chaos. Some were outsiders, beggars, former slaves, or women without family ties, while others were deeply ingrained in the community as church leaders, affluent farmers, and even former accusers. Once the cycle of distrust commenced, it spared no one, tearing families asunder, causing spouses to incriminate each other, children to testify against parents, and friends to betray one another. Even those who dared to question the validity of the trials became targets themselves. Witnessing the madness was most evident in the behavior of the afflicted girls, who cried out in agony, claimed to see spectral creatures, imitated the accused, and collapsed together during court proceedings. Despite the theatrical and unbelievable nature of their actions, their performance was crucial to the prosecution's argument. The court accepted their suffering and cries as undeniable proof and divine testimony. Over 150 arrests were made, and the executions persisted through the summer. Sarah Good, a homeless woman, was hanged in July for her refusal to confess, which was viewed as defiance against God rather than bravery. Even Rebecca Nurse, a well-respected grandmother and church member, faced execution despite significant opposition, sending a chilling message that no one, not even the devout, was immune to suspicion. The relentless accusations continued, leading to the imprisonment of children as young as 5, the accusation of a minister's wife, and the incarceration of entire families. The colony had succumbed to irrationality, consumed by the evil it sought to eradicate. Fear became the dominant force in Salem, distorting justice, distorting the truth, and stifling dissent. Starting as a few peculiar incidents, the situation had escalated into something much more sinister, a society destroying itself through endless accusations. By the end of the summer in 1692, the Salem witch trials had plunged to their most sinister depths. The gallows at Proctor's Ledge loomed ominously in the distance, serving as a site of grim executions where pleas for clemency were drowned out by the finality of judgment. The public hangings were intended to deter others, prompting entire communities to gather for the spectacle. Some came out of solemn apprehension, while others disturbingly treated the executions as entertainment. Each convicted individual was taken to the gallows, bound and offering prayers until the moment of death. The trapdoors fell, claiming another life in the name of justice. 19 people, comprising 14 women and 5 men, were hanged as accused witches, all affirming their innocence. Some passed away while whispering prayers or reciting psalms with trembling voices. Denied proper burials due to their convictions, these individuals, deemed witches, were not allowed in church cemeteries. Some were laid to rest in shallow, unmarked graves, and a few were secretly taken by loved ones under the cover of night. However, the most horrifying fate befell Giles Corey, an 81-year-old farmer and husband of Martha Corey, an accused witch. At his trial, Giles, in a bid to safeguard his land from confiscation, chose not to plead. As a result, authorities resorted to a cruel and unusual punishment called pressing. Giles was stripped, laid down, and slowly crushed beneath heavy stones over a period of 2 agonizing days. His final words, as per legend, were hauntingly defiant. More weight. He perished without uttering a plea, becoming a tragic symbol of the injustice prevalent in Salem. Meanwhile, those awaiting execution in the jails endured dreadful conditions. Expectant mothers gave birth in squalid cells. The sick succumbed to neglect, and families were responsible for providing their own sustenance and restraints. Some remained incarcerated for months post the trial's conclusion. By the arrival of autumn and the shedding of leaves, Salem had sentenced more individuals to death for witchcraft than any other American community in history. What had started as mere whispers culminated in bloodshed. Although the executions would soon halt, the profound damage to Salem's spirit was irreversible. By the end of September 1692, the grip of hysteria over Salem began to weaken. The pivotal moment did not come from the sense of unease wasn't solely from the courts or the clergy, but had grown within the community. It was a belated acknowledgement that something had gone terribly wrong. Doubts began to surface gradually. The unsettling feeling arose when well-respected individuals, like Rebecca Nurse and John Proctor, were executed. If such esteemed, principled people could be accused of witchcraft, who could be trusted As accusations extended to figures like Martha Corey and Lady Mary Phipps, the trials expanded to affect even the elite of society. The hysteria no longer targeted just the marginalized, but threatened everyone. Reverend Inker Mather, a prominent Puritan minister and father of Cotton Mather, delivered a compelling sermon denouncing the use of spectral evidence, which formed the basis of many convictions. He stressed that it was preferable for 10 suspected witches to escape than for one innocent person to be wrongly condemned. This marked a significant change in tone and subtly criticized the court's procedures. Other ministers followed suit in voicing caution after previously supporting the trials. Families of the accused spoke out publicly, and neighboring communities distanced themselves in horror from Salem. Governor William Phipps responded to mounting criticism and political pressure by disbanding the court of Oyer and Terminina in October 1692. A new court was established, no longer admitting spectral evidence. The impact was immediate. Most of the remaining prisoners awaiting trial were acquitted. Those convicted received reprieves, and the executions ceased. Nevertheless, the repercussions were severe. 19 individuals were hanged, 1 was pressed to death, over 100 were imprisoned, and many more were left traumatized, with families torn apart and reputations ruined. While the tides had shifted, the full release of the last prisoners would take months, even years, despite the court's reforms. The community took a long time to fully acknowledge its wrongdoings. However, during that autumn, the fear subsided, the gallows quieted down, and Salem faced the harsh truth that it was fear, not witches, that had controlled them. As the last prisoners were set free in 1693, the town was burdened not just with empty cells but also with guilt. The aftermath of the trials brought lingering feelings of accusation, betrayal, and execution that lingered in every household and church. An unsettling silence enveloped the town, leaving a profound unease among its residents. Over time, some individuals involved in the trials began expressing remorse. A significant apology was made by Judge Samuel Sewall in 1697 during a public day of fasting and prayer at Boston's South Church. He publicly acknowledged his responsibility and sought forgiveness from God. While some judges and accusers chose to remain silent or defend their actions, the prevailing sentiment, especially among the clergy, was that the court had made grave mistakes. Even Cotton Mather, who initially supported the use of spectral evidence, moderated his stance in later writings. In 1706, Anne Putnam Jr., one of the original accusers who was a child during the trials, confessed her role in the deaths of innocent people. She attributed her actions to deception by Satan and sought divine forgiveness. The woman stood out in her community by addressing the victims by their names. Unlike many others, families of the accused had fought for years to clear their loved ones' names. In 1711, the Massachusetts legislature passed a bill to restore the rights of some of those convicted and provide compensation to their descendants. However, not all names were vindicated, and not all families received recompense. Through generations, the town was haunted by the trials, but Salem gradually attempted to heal. It transformed into a symbol of the consequences. When fear triumphs over reason, justice is forsaken by the courts, and hysteria is perceived as truth. Although a reckoning had commenced, complete justice remained elusive, as history often demonstrates. More than 300 years have elapsed since the hangings in Salem, yet the impact of the witch trials persists in American consciousness, serving as a solemn reminder of the potency of fear, the vulnerability of justice, and the peril of unchecked beliefs. The term Salem witch trials now epitomizes mass hysteria, unjust accusations, and moral frenzy. It is cited in legal proceedings, educational settings, and political discourse as a cautionary narrative illustrating how easily suspicion can overshadow rationality and how swiftly a society can turn against its own members. Today, Salem grapples with its history in a nuanced manner. The city attracts global visitors with its museums, tributes, and guided excursions. Established in 1992 on the trial's 300th anniversary, the Salem Witch Trials Memorial features 20 stone benches, each bearing the name of an executed individual. These inscriptions do not detail their supposed crimes, as there were none, instead providing names, dates, and final declarations that stand as testimonials to dignity in the face of injustice. Salem's story holds a significance beyond mere tourism or folklore, functioning as a mirror to human behavior. The trials exemplify the spread of fear, the misuse of power in the guise of morality, and the potential for justice to waver when driven by emotion rather than evidence. In literature, Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible, revitalized the trials as a symbol for McCarthyism and the Red Scare of the 1950s. Miller alerted a new generation to the fact that witch hunts are not always about witches, and that the past remains relevant. Descendants of the accused and accusers still reside in Massachusetts and throughout the U.S., some grappling with ancestral shame, while others carry the pride of resilience. In 2001, more than 3 centuries later, Massachusetts officially absolved the last 5 victims, concluding the legal vindication of all accused individuals. Though the Salem witch trials were brief, lasting just over a year, their teachings remain timeless, emphasizing the necessity to uphold truth in the face of overwhelming fear, and the realization that profound injustices can unfold not in darkness, but in broad daylight.